41,000 feet above northern Ontario, the cockpit of a Boeing 767 goes silent. Not quiet, silent. No engine hum, no instrument lights. Just a single battery-powered dial and 69 people who don't yet know both engines are dead. Both pilots frantically searched for the cause. Had the fuel pumps failed? They had already shut one of them down just minutes earlier after a warning light appeared. But when the second engine failed too, it became obvious this wasn't a mechanical failure. So why had both engines died? After a few moments of silence, they both reached the same conclusion. One that shouldn't have been possible. 9 hours earlier, on July 23, 1983 in Montreal, two separate teams prepared the Boeing 767 for departure. The ground crew checked it first, then the pilot checked it again. In 1983, Canada was only partway through switching from imperial units to metric. This particular Boeing 767 was the first aircraft in Air Canada's fleet built to run on kilograms instead of pounds. Everything around it, the fuel trucks, the paperwork, the habits of the ground crew, was still built for pounds. And that simple fact led to a very human failure. The first thing that happened was a broken fuel gauge. It can happen and actually happened days before this flight. That wasn't the problem because the fuel was measured the old way. Dip a stick into the tank, read the depth in centimeters, convert that volume into weight by hand, and check it with the second gauge, the backup system that was still running. But on that day, a technician who wanted to fix the problem accidentally disabled the backup system, and nobody noticed. But that was only one part of the chain of failures. The original broken gauge and the backup gauge had the same function. They measured the fuel by mass, converted it automatically, and displayed the amount in kilograms on the cockpit computer. Normally, no human does the math. No human has to. But this time, it was necessary. You have to understand that even this was not a huge thing. People were trained to do it. The crux in this case was something most people never think about: conversion. Normally, the fuel measured in liters was converted into pounds. You multiplied the liters by the fuel's density, which was 1.77. To get the result in kilograms, you used 0.803, less than half. That's conversion, and that's what went disturbingly wrong. Two separate teams calculated exactly how much fuel this aircraft needed. Both times, the math came out the same: 22,300 kilograms, and both times, it was wrong by 12,000 kilograms, roughly the weight of 8 adult elephants simply missing from the tanks. So how does a fully staffed airline with two independent checks miss 12,000 kilograms of fuel both times and somehow feel more confident because they checked twice? Two crews multiplied by the wrong figure. The ground crew in Montreal calculated the fuel using 1.77, the number for pounds, but presented the result in kilograms. The math looked completely normal, just smaller than it should have been. The tanks were topped off accordingly. When the aircraft stopped in Ottawa, and a second dipstick reading was taken, a different person ran the exact same calculation with the exact same wrong number, and arrived at an answer that matched the first one almost perfectly. To both crews, the agreement looked like confirmation. In reality, they were two identical mistakes confirming each other. This brings us back to the silent cockpit. Halfway through the flight, at 41,000 feet, both engines flamed out within moments of each other. Not one after the other by chance, but together, because there was simply nothing left to burn. The cockpit goes dark except for a handful of battery-powered instruments. Hydraulic pressure collapses. A small propeller called a ram air turbine drops out of the fuselage, spinning in the wind to generate just enough power to keep the controls alive. Nobody built this plane to fly without power. Nobody trained these pilots to land it that way either. A wide-body jet, designed to be pushed through the sky by two engines, is now simply falling forward. The two men flying it had one advantage nobody had planned for. Captain Bob Pearson wasn't just an airline pilot. In his own time off the clock, he co-owned a small glider, the kind of aircraft with no engine at all, flown purely by reading the air, speed, and altitude. It's a hobby that has nothing to do with flying a Boeing 767. On this day, it was the only relevant qualification in the cockpit. First Officer Maurice Quintal had a different piece of unrelated history. Years earlier, he'd served at a Royal Canadian Air Force base named Gimli, one that, as far as most flight computers were concerned, no longer existed. It had closed in 1971, but he remembered exactly where it was and that its runway was still there. Neither skill was in Air Canada's training manual. Both turned out to be the only thing standing between 69 people and the ground. What First Officer Quintal didn't know was that Gimli had quietly become a drag strip, full of families and go-karts on a Saturday afternoon, with no idea what was about to land in the middle of their race day. Captain Bob Pearson had begun flying the Boeing like a giant glider, reading the wind, the sink rate, the airspeed, and the aircraft's glide characteristics while Quintal navigated toward the old Gimli base. With the skills he had gained from his personal hobby and a maneuver never used in commercial airliners, he accomplished what had never been considered possible before. He landed a Boeing 767 like a glider on an airfield that had been turned into a family drag strip on a busy Saturday afternoon, and the only injuries happened while evacuating the aircraft via the rear emergency slides. That single event changed aviation history and made the Gimli Glider one of the most famous near catastrophes ever. That's the strange shape this story keeps taking. A decommissioned airfield, a stranger's old hobby, a wrong number that agreed with itself twice. None of it was designed to work together. It just happened to. And that's usually how it goes with blind spots like this one. Sometimes the wrong moment just happens to find the right people.